In the last 50 years, humankind has drastically impacted the natural environment. Our actions have led to substantial consequences affecting the diversity of life on Earth. Global sea levels are projected to rise up to 4 feet by the end of the century. Around the world, coastal cities have become increasingly threatened by rising sea levels. By 2050, the Arctic ice caps are expected to be completely melted. As the health of the environment only continues to decline, the concept of sustainability becomes an increasingly imperative one. Through conscious design that values and acknowledges the importance of nature, our generation of designers must work towards design that is driven by the function of sustainability. Sustainability must become a bottom-up approach that, in the words of William McDonough, creates a partnership between nature and man.
When Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring in 1962, it ignited an environmental movement. Throughout the novel, she presents the idea that humankind is poisoning nature, and nature will in turn poison humankind. Carson states, man is a part of nature, and his war against nature is inevitably a war against himself. As the severity of nature's abuse increases, it has become more and more evident that our ways must change. Environmentalism was then wrenched from its relatively narrow conservative view and transformed into a social movement. Additionally, Carson says that because humanity's technological progress is so fundamentally at odds with nature, it must be restricted. While this statement is well intended, it is somewhat misled. It is not so much that progress needs to be restricted, but that its approach needs to be redirected. Scientists, engineers, and designers must incorporate the needs of nature. In the field of architecture, this can be achieved through sustainable design. Sustainable architecture seeks to minimize the negative environmental impacts of a building through moderate and efficient use of materials, energy, and development space. Architects attempting to design sustainably use a conscious approach to energy and ecological conservation in the design of the built environment. They design for both man and nature. Moreover, materials must be taken into account as a means of implementing these designs. Rachel Armstrong, a sustainability advocate, led a TED Talk titled Architecture That Repairs Itself, in which she states that in order to truly create a sustainable and environmentally friendly architecture, the design process needs to be in a constant conversation with its surroundings. Additionally, she proposed the idea of materials that could have a conversation with the atmosphere, which would ultimately make sustainable designs more effective. In her lecture, Armstrong says, "What we're trying to do is push these technologies towards creating bottom-up construction approaches for architecture, which contrast the current Victorian top-down methods, which impose structure upon matter. This bottom-up mentality is crucial to sustainable design. The only way to create sustainable homes and cities is to connect them to nature, rather than insulating them from the outer world."
In order to bring about discourse of sustainability in the design community, William McDonough and Dr. Michael Brungart wrote the Hindenburg Principles in 1992. The list of 9 principles serves as a manifesto for human interaction with the environment informed by sustainable use of products and processes that resemble the living world. In this manifesto, McDonough encourages a reliance on natural energy flows, respect for the evolving relationships between the spiritual and material consciousness, and the creation of a dialogue between designers and engineers to inform improvement. In 1995, McDonough and Brungart wrote Cradle to Cradle, a definitive statement of their design philosophy that emphasizes an industrial re-evolution and a cradle-to-cradle system of production which seeks to create techniques that are efficient and waste-free. In his TED Talk, Cradle to Cradle Design, McDonough addresses the inherent problems exposed by Rachel Carson in Silent Spring by questioning a society that inflicts harm on the natural world without malicious intent. He criticizes individual past actions for the lack of plan from society's designers to deal with our actions of the past in light of how the future could respond. McDonough addresses an interesting point when he references his education at Yale in 1970, speaking on efforts to address sustainability by designing a solar-heated house for a project, only to be narrowly dismissed by his professor, saying that solar energy had nothing to do with architecture. While the design approach to sustainability was considered new at this time and not essential to the theory of architecture, now it is the job of our generation to develop a plan that has been missing for decades. This plan must understand that the future response to current actions are just as important as a deciding factor into what actions we take to address present situations. Some applications of this informed design is the certification process established by McDonough to assess the total quality of a product based on 5 materials as nutrients for safe, continuous cycling, development of systems to safely close the loop of our biological and technical nutrients, power all operations 100% renewable energy, regard water as a precious resource, and finally, respect for all people and natural systems. McDonough advocates to practice a process of upcycling to return materials to their original production state. In addition, McDonough and partners designed 901 Cherry Avenue in San Bruno, California in 1999, and redesigned Dearborn Truck Factory in Ford's Row Center in Michigan with green roofs to provide thermal and acoustic insulation and a rainwater reclamation system to contribute to increased energy savings year-round.
In electroactive dynamic display systems, EDDS, Anna Dyson, Best Kratemeyer, Peter Stark, and Case RPI claim there is a loss of connection to material behavior within the design process. They explain that during the design process of any structure, the architect looks at materials based on the original properties and then makes choices as to which materials can be used. This raises an important question. Can the materials instead be designed alongside the whole process? From specifying materials and engineering around their known capabilities to specifying desired material behavior and designing the materials accordingly. Not just looking at what a material can do for an infrastructure on the macro scale, but looking at what it can do on the nano or micro scale that can really have an overall effect on the structure as a whole. On Weathering by Mustafavi and Leatherbarrow claim that weathering brings the virtual future of a building into dialogue with its actual present as both are entangled in its past. This can be seen in the design of the De Young Museum by Herzog and de Meuron, where this idea that the materiality of the outer surface of the museum is just as important as the building itself, due to the layer of patina that gradually continues to form on its surface. The fact that they can use age and decaying towards the benefit of the building is an example of sustainability. As the building deteriorates, it does not deteriorate in a means where it would need constant renovation. The opposite, however, is seen in the Villa Savoye by Le Corbusier, which had to be renovated continually because material sustainability was not thought of during its design process. Sustainability not only relates to designing materials according to a structure, but also according to its response to its environment, as in the past few decades, an array of smart materials have been and continue to be created with this idea in mind. For example, this is seen in the Al-Bahar Towers by Aedis Architects in Abu Dhabi, where the geometry of the facade panels can be changed based on sun exposure and its different incident angles during the different days of the year. Another installation of this concept is in Masdar City, a planned city project by Foster and Partners Architects, also in Abu Dhabi, which relies mostly on solar energy and other renewable energy sources.
Landscapes by Kelly Shannon illustrates how sustainability is a means for architects and designers to design with nature rather than against it in order to create a healthier and more durable built and natural environment. In her essay, Shannon explains how architects, landscape architects, and urban designers can create a partnership with nature by approaching the landscape as process instead of the traditional approach of viewing landscape as picture. This shift in perspective views the landscape as an active member in the design process rather than an auxiliary factor, in a philosophy called landscape urbanism. According to Shannon, landscape urbanism is a mode of landscape architecture and urbanism that goes beyond conventional park and garden design, that attempts to re-emphasize the importance of particular sites and the ecological and artificial processes that they encompass. The Fresh Kills project, undertaken by Field Operations, a landscape and design firm led by James Corner, is an ongoing project that exemplifies this. Essentially a reclamation project, Field Operations sets out to turn Fresh Kills, previously a temporary landfill in Staten Island, into a recreational park that will be almost 3 times the size of Central Park. Over 30 years, the firm will implement a 4-phase process that will redevelop the landfill: seeding, infrastructure, programming, and adaptation, with each phase focusing on the environment and its interactions with its users. This approach to landscape architecture illustrates how man and nature can work together. By adapting the landscape to the community's needs, as well as adapting the community to the landscape, architecture and landscape architecture become sustainable. This flexibility is necessary in order for nature and man to coexist.
Science and the impacts of global warming have proved that the implementation of sustainable design is necessary for the future of nature and man. However, in reality, there are many factors that prevent us from working towards sustainability. External pressures such as budget and time management limit construction. This shows the top-down and autonomous nature of architecture that is often the case in many decision-making procedures. Through sustainable design, we can see how architecture can be a vehicle for change. Architecture and design will always be present in our lives, but if we do not adapt a bottom-up design approach that takes into account the needs of nature, driven by the function of sustainability, the future will bring serious consequences.